What is the price of a person's dignity? For Arthur Sterling, a millionaire who dripped arrogance like cheap cologne, it was a joke, a casual insult thrown at a waitress with a foreign accent. He thought his money made him untouchable, his words a king's decree. But in the hushed, opulent dining room of one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, he was about to learn a lesson that would cost him millions. He mocked her speech, calling her uneducated. He didn't know he wasn't speaking to a simple waitress. He was speaking to the very mind that could make or break his empire. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Perched on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan. The air inside hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the nervous energy of new fortunes. Every detail was curated for perfection, from the velvet on the chairs to the precisely folded damask napkins that sat like pristine white birds on each plate. The clientele was a who's who of the city's elite, and the staff were expected to be ghosts, present but unnoticed, anticipating every need with silent, flawless efficiency. Among these spectres of service was Elena Petrova. To the patrons who bothered to look at her, she was just another part of the decor. A young woman with warm, intelligent eyes, hair pulled back in a severe, professional bun, and a crisp, white uniform. What they noticed, if they noticed anything at all, was her accent. It was a soft, melodic lilt, a gentle ghost of Eastern Europe that clung to her otherwise perfect English. For most, it was unremarkable. For some, it was a mark, a label that allowed them to place her into a neat, easily dismissible box. Elena had been working at Aurelia for 6 months. The job was grueling, the hours long, and the patrons often demanding. But she moved through the dining room with an unshakable grace. She possessed an uncanny ability to read a table, to know when to approach, when to hold back, when a glass needed refilling before its owner even realized they were thirsty. Her manager, a perpetually stressed Frenchman named Mr. Dubois, considered her his best waitress. She was reliable, intelligent, and most importantly, she never complained. She needed the money, of course. New York was an insatiably expensive city, and her small apartment in a less fashionable part of town consumed most of her earnings. But there was another reason she was here, a reason she kept locked away behind her serene, professional smile. Aurelia was a living laboratory. The conversations she overheard, the power dynamics she observed, the casual cruelties and unexpected kindnesses. It was all data. Every night after her shift, she would go home, her feet aching and her mind buzzing, and fill a worn, leather-bound journal with observations. Tonight, the buzz in the restaurant was palpable. The coveted corner table, the one with the most breathtaking view of the sparkling city below, was booked for Arthur Sterling. The name alone sent a ripple of anxiety through the staff. Sterling was a notorious venture capitalist, a man who had built a billion-dollar empire by crushing his competitors. He was known for his sharp mind, his extravagant lifestyle, and his brutal, unforgiving temper. He treated service staff not as people, but as obstacles or tools. "Elena," Mr. Dubois said, his voice low as he adjusted his tie in a reflection. "Table 7. Mr. Sterling. Be perfect. No, be better than perfect." Elena simply nodded, her expression calm. Of course, Mr. Dubois. She had served difficult customers before. Arrogant politicians, demanding celebrities, condescending heirs. She had a system, a mental shield she erected, a professional persona that was polite, deferential, and utterly impenetrable. At precisely 8 p.m., Arthur Sterling arrived. He wasn't a physically imposing man, but he carried an aura of immense, suffocating self-importance. He was dressed in a tailored suit, that probably cost more than Elena's annual rent. Flanking him were two younger associates, a man and a woman, both with the eager, predatory smiles of acolytes, desperate to please their master. "Sterling, table for 3, he announced to the hostess, not bothering to make eye contact. His voice was a loud, grating baritone that cut through the restaurant's sophisticated hum. As they were led to the corner table, Elena took a deep, steadying breath. She picked up 3 leather-bound menus and a bottle of the specific sparkling water Mr. Dubois had instructed her to have ready. She approached the table, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Welcome to Aurelia," she said, her voice calm and even. "May I offer you some water to start?" Sterling finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe in a dismissive, appraising glance. A small, cruel smirk played on his lips. He leaned back in his chair, making a show of it for his companions. "Well, listen to that," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Where are they importing you girls from now? Somewhere with a lot of potatoes and sad folk songs, I bet." His associates, Mark and Chloe, let out forced, tinny laughs. Elena's smile didn't waver, but behind her eyes, the shield solidified into something harder, something like ice. The observation had begun. Elena poured the sparkling water into 3 crystal glasses, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. The tiny bubbles fizzed, a sound that seemed loud in the sudden, charged silence at the table. She ignored the insult, the way a mountain ignores a gust of wind. It was a tactic she had perfected, absolute professionalism as a form of armor. "The specials for this evening are a pan-seared scallops with a saffron risotto and a dry-aged porterhouse for 2, she continued, her tone perfectly modulated, her accent the only hint of the woman behind the uniform. Sterling watched her, a predator amused by its prey's refusal to show fear. He picked up his menu but didn't look at it. His eyes were fixed on her. "Scallops," he mused, dragging the word out. "That's a big word. You pronounce it very carefully. Did you have to practice that one?" Mark chuckled again, a sycophantic bark. "Give her a break, Arthur. She's doing her best." It was a comment designed not to defend her, but to ingratiate himself further with his boss by highlighting the joke. Chloe, the other associate, simply smiled a tight, polished smile and looked down at her menu, distancing herself just enough to maintain plausible deniability while still being part of the inner circle. "I am sure I can manage, sir," Elena replied, her gaze polite and direct. She refused to be baited, to let her composure crack. This was the game. His power came from provoking a reaction, from making others feel small to inflate his own ego. Her power came from denying him that satisfaction. "I'm sure you can," Sterling drawled, finally opening his menu. "Let's see if you can manage this. I'll have the lobster bisque, but I want it strained. Twice. I don't want any of those little chewy bits. And tell the chef to use tarragon, not parsley. If I taste parsley, I'll send it back. Then the filet mignon, medium rare. But I mean a true medium rare. A warm red center. Not pink, not purple, red. If your chef needs a color chart, feel free to buy him one on me." It was a classic power play. The overly complex order was designed to be difficult, to set a trap. Any small deviation would be grounds for a tirade. "Of course, sir. A twice-strained lobster bisque with tarragon and a filet mignon, warm red center," she repeated back flawlessly. "And for you, sir?" "Ma'am?" she asked, turning to Mark and Chloe. They quickly placed their simpler orders, eager to move the spotlight away from themselves. As Elena collected the menus, Sterling wasn't finished. "You know," he said, loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear, I'm in the business of communication. Clarity, precision. That's what makes or breaks a deal. A person's speech says everything about their background, their education, their potential. He looked directly at Elena. It's fascinating, really. A thick accent. It's like a wall. It tells you immediately, this person is not from here. They're not one of us. It's a marker of, well, let's just say, it's not a marker of the C-suite. The insult was more refined this time, wrapped in the guise of a business philosophy. But its intent was just as sharp, just as cruel. It was designed to publicly categorize her as intellectually inferior. Elena felt a familiar, hot sting behind her eyes, but she willed it away. She thought of her father, a professor of literature back in her home country, who spoke 4 languages and taught her that words were bridges, not weapons. What would he think of a man like this, who used language as a bludgeon? She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I will place your orders with the kitchen immediately, sir. With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. She could feel his eyes on her, feel the smug satisfaction radiating from the table. She didn't hurry. She moved with the same deliberate grace as before. As she passed the service station, she caught her reflection in a polished silver tray. The woman staring back looked calm, composed, but inside, the academic in her was scribbling furious notes, and the woman herself was feeling the slow, simmering burn of rage. This wasn't just an insult to her. It was an insult to every person who had ever been judged by the sound of their voice rather than the content of their character. The gilded cage of Aurelia was beginning to feel very small indeed. The appetizers arrived. Elena placed the bowls on the table with practiced precision. Sterling immediately dipped a spoon into his bisque, bringing it to his lips with a theatrical slowness. He swirled it in his mouth, his eyes closed as if he were a world-renowned connoisseur tasting a priceless vintage. "Well, well," he announced, opening his eyes. "The kitchen staff must have a dictionary. They found tarragon." "Miracles do happen." Elena said nothing, simply refilling their water glasses before retreating to a discreet distance. From her vantage point, she could observe the dynamics of the table. Sterling held court, pontificating about a recent acquisition, his voice a monologue that demanded rapt attention. Mark and Chloe hung on his every word, nodding, laughing, their ambition a palpable force field around the table. They were discussing a major upcoming pitch. The name Innovate Lingua was mentioned several times, along with Series B funding and disrupting the translation market. It was a deal Elena knew a little about, not from the restaurant gossip, but from the tech journals she still read voraciously. Innovate Lingua was a startup with a revolutionary piece of software. It used a form of generative AI not just to translate text, but to analyze nuance, sentiment, and cultural context in real time. It was a quantum leap beyond anything currently on the market, with profound implications for international business, diplomacy, and law. The problem, she recalled from an article in the MIT Technology Review, was its complexity. The core algorithm was based on an obscure branch of theoretical linguistics and computational neuroscience. It was brilliant, but almost impossible to explain to laypeople, making it a tough sell even for savvy investors. Apparently, Sterling was trying to secure the next, and most crucial, round of funding. When she cleared the appetizer plates, Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Another bottle of the Chateau Margaux, and tell the sommelier not to bother me. Just have our little UN interpreter here bring it." Each comment was a small paper cut, designed to bleed her of her composure. Yet, Elena remained a mask of professional calm. She retrieved the wine, a 1982 vintage that cost more than her monthly salary. She presented the bottle to Sterling, her hands steady. "A very good year, sir," she said, her voice even. He scoffed. "What would you know about it? Did you stomp the grapes yourself back in the old country?" This time, the jab landed harder. It wasn't just an insult about her accent. It was a sneering caricature of her origins, painting her as a rustic peasant. For a fleeting second, an image of her graduation day flashed in her mind. The sun on the lawn of Harvard Yard, the weight of the diploma in her hand, the proud faces of her parents. The contrast between that memory and this moment was so stark, so brutally absurd, that a cold, quiet fury began to crystallize within her. The main courses arrived. The filet was set before Sterling. He immediately sliced into it, peeling back the seared crust to examine the center. It was a perfect warm red. He grunted, clearly disappointed that he had been denied the opportunity to unleash his anger on the chef. His frustration, having found no outlet in the food, turned back to its easiest target. "You know, the funny thing is," he said, chewing his steak, "people like you come to this country expecting a handout. You work these little jobs, and you think you're contributing, but you're not. You're just background noise. No real skills. No ambition." "Arthur, the pitch," Chloe interjected gently, trying to steer her boss back to the topic of innovate lingua. There were other people at the surrounding tables, and even for a man like Sterling, his cruelty was becoming uncomfortably loud. But he was on a roll. He ignored her and pointed his fork at Elena. "Take her. What's your grand plan? Work here for 30 years. Marry a bus driver. It's a dead end. Because you lack the one thing that matters in this city, a top-tier education. You can't buy it, and you certainly can't fake it. Your accent gives you away every time you open your mouth." He leaned back, satisfied, a smug grin on his face. He had finally laid it all bare. His core belief that her accent was an undeniable sign of a second-rate mind, a permanent barrier to success. He saw her as a static, finished thing, a waitress, and nothing more. Elena met his gaze. The shield was still there, but it had become a one-way mirror. She was seeing him with perfect, chilling clarity, analyzing him, dissecting his prejudices, his insecurities, his pathetic need to feel powerful. She was no longer just a waitress serving a rude customer. She was a scientist, observing a specimen in its natural, toxic habitat. And the specimen was about to make a fatal error. The conversation at Sterling's table finally shifted in earnest to the innovate lingua deal. The reason for their dinner at Aurelia became clear. They were rehearsing. This was a dry run for a pivotal meeting the next day, with a notoriously meticulous group of international investors, led by a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. Dr. Sharma, Sterling explained, wasn't a typical venture capitalist. She held a PhD in computational linguistics from Cambridge and was one of the world's foremost experts on machine learning and language models. She was old school, academic, and notoriously difficult to impress with marketing fluff. To win her over, one had to command the science. "She's the final gatekeeper," Sterling said, swirling the last of the expensive wine in his glass. "Her fund's backing would trigger a cascade. We get her, we get everyone. But she'll pick apart every single slide. Mark, walk me through the core tech again. The Petrovich-Larsen conjecture. That's the part that always trips me up." Elena, standing at a respectable distance while pretending to scan the dining room, felt a jolt. The Petrovich-Larsen conjecture. It wasn't a well-known theory. In fact, it was so niche, so cutting-edge, that only a handful of academics in the world were truly familiar with it. It was a theoretical framework that proposed a new way of modeling how the human brain processes linguistic ambiguity. And Dr. Elena Petrova knew it better than almost anyone. It had been the central pillar of her doctoral dissertation at Harvard. The Petrovich in the conjecture wasn't a coincidence. It was her father, Dr. Ivan Petrovich, the literature professor, who was also a brilliant, if obscure, theoretical linguist. He and a colleague, Dr. Larson, had co-authored the seminal paper a decade ago. Elena had grown up with its concepts discussed over the dinner table. She had not only studied it, she had built upon it, refined it, and even challenged parts of it in her own published work. She listened as Mark, the junior associate, launched into his explanation. "Okay, so, essentially," Mark began, his voice laced with the false confidence of someone who has memorized a script. The Petrovic-Larson conjecture states that language isn't processed in a linear way, but in a multimodal matrix. The AI leverages this by creating contextual resonance points that map the syntactical structures against sentiment vectors. Elena almost winced. It was a clumsy, jargon-filled word salad. He was using the right buzzwords, but had completely missed the core elegance of the theory. He was describing the what without a shred of understanding of the why or the how. It was like describing the Mona Lisa as a painting of a woman on a piece of wood. Sterling, however, didn't seem to notice. He was a big picture man. The granular details bored him. Right, the resonance points," he said impatiently. "And that's what makes it faster than anything else on the market. That's the key selling point. Speed and accuracy through the matrix thing." "Exactly," Mark agreed, visibly relieved to have gotten through it. But Chloe, who seemed slightly more astute, pressed the issue. "But Dr. Sharma will ask how the conjecture avoids the symbol grounding problem that plagues other models." The original paper was criticized for being purely theoretical on that point. What's Innovate Lingua's unique solution? Silence. Mark fumbled. Sterling looked annoyed. "It's proprietary," Sterling snapped. "It's the secret sauce. We tell her it's a proprietary algorithm that bridges the symbolic representation with real-world sensory data. We use a lot of impressive words, we show her the demo, and we move on. Don't get bogged down in academic nonsense." Elena froze. That was their strategy? To hand-wave the single most critical and most brilliant part of Innovate Lingua's breakthrough? The solution to the symbol grounding problem was the entire innovation. Her father's original conjecture hadn't solved it, but her own dissertation work had proposed a viable pathway, a novel approach using nested layers of abstraction that she called semantic anchoring. She knew for a fact that the young founders of Innovate Lingua had built their entire company on a practical application of her published theoretical work. They had even cited her paper in their patent filings. Arthur Sterling was about to walk into a meeting with the one woman who would spot this gaping hole in his knowledge in a nanosecond, and he was planning to bluff his way through it. He was about to confidently pilot his billion-dollar battleship directly onto a reef of his own ignorance. And in that moment, Elena understood. The evening had presented her with a choice. She could remain a ghost, a silent observer, and allow this arrogant, cruel man to humiliate himself and implode his own deal. It would be a fitting, private karma. Or she could do something else. The insults, the condescension, the relentless chipping away at her dignity had forged her simmering anger into a fine, sharp point. She looked at Arthur Sterling, a man who judged the world based on the most superficial of cues, and decided he deserved more than a private failure. He deserved a public education. The final act of the dinner began with the arrival of dessert menus. Sterling, buoyed by his own flawed understanding of the technology he was betting millions on, was back in high spirits. His condescension towards Elena returned with renewed vigor. "Let's see if our linguist can handle the French words on this menu," he boomed, tossing a menu in her direction. "Crème brûlée. Can you say that, dear? Or is that too much of a tongue twister?" Elena simply picked up the menu from the floor where it had landed. She didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, she asked, "Will there be anything else for you this evening? Coffee, perhaps?" "An espresso," he commanded. "And make it quick. We have important business to prepare for. We're about to change the world while you're busy refilling coffee cups. Quite the contrast in life trajectories, wouldn't you say?" This was it. The final, arrogant pronouncement. The closing statement from a man who believed he was perched atop the world, utterly secure in his judgments. Elena looked from Sterling to his two associates. Mark was smirking, enjoying the show. Chloe, however, looked uncomfortable. Her eyes darted around the room, a flicker of shame in her expression. She knew this was wrong, but her ambition kept her silent. "There is just one thing, Mr. Sterling," Elena said. Her voice was different now. The deferential, whisper-soft tone of the waitress was gone. It was replaced by something quiet, but firm, with the unmistakable resonance of authority. It was the voice of a lecturer, a scholar. The shift was so unexpected that it momentarily broke through Sterling's bubble of self-importance. He actually stopped and looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time all night. "What did you say?" he asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. "You mentioned you were meeting with Dr. Anya Sharma tomorrow," Elena said, her gaze unwavering, "regarding the Series B funding for Innovate Lingua." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "I don't recall discussing my private business with the help. Have you been eavesdropping?" "It's difficult not to overhear, sir," Elena replied calmly. "You mentioned the Petrovic-Larsen conjecture. Your explanation of it has a critical flaw, one that Dr. Sharma will identify within the first 5 minutes of your presentation." A stunned silence fell over the table. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. Chloe's eyes widened. This was so far beyond the normal script of a waitress-patron interaction that it felt surreal. Sterling was the first to recover. He let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was brittle, laced with fury. "A flaw? Identified by you? You have got to be kidding me. You're a waitress. You carry plates for a living. What could you possibly know about theoretical linguistics and quantum computing?" "I know," Elena said, her voice still quiet but carrying an immense weight, "that your strategy to hand-wave the symbol grounding problem will be a catastrophic failure. Dr. Sharma's own postdoctoral work was a critique of early models that failed to address it. To her, it's not academic nonsense. It's the entire foundation of the field. Pitching her without a concrete, defensible solution is like trying to sell a skyscraper without a foundation. She won't just reject your proposal. She'll see it as a profound sign of disrespect for her intelligence." The color drained from Mark's face. He knew she was right. They all did. They had been worried about this exact point, and Sterling had bullied them into ignoring it. But Sterling's ego was too massive to allow for a retreat. He was cornered, and like a cornered animal, he lashed out. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped, and the entire dining room went silent. Every head turned towards their table. Mr. Dubois started moving towards them from across the room, his face a mask of panic. "You are a nobody!" Sterling spat, his face turning a blotchy red. A little immigrant girl with a funny accent who got lucky enough to land a job serving her betters. You will get me my espresso, and then you will bring me the check, and then you will disappear. If you say one more word, I will have you fired. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Mr. Dubois was only a few feet away now. This was Elena's last chance to retreat, to apologize, to melt back into the background and save her job. She didn't even glance at her manager. Her eyes remained locked on Arthur Sterling's. She took a slow, deliberate breath. The shield was gone. The mirror was gone. All that remained was the scholar, the expert, the woman who had endured 1,000 tiny cuts all evening and was now ready to wield a sword. "No, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity in the silent room. "I don't think I will." The entire restaurant was a tableau of suspended animation. Diners held forks midway to their mouths. Waiters froze with bottles of wine in hand. Mr. Dubois stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth slightly agape. All eyes were on the corner table, where a waitress had just openly defied one of the most powerful and volatile men in the city. Arthur Sterling looked as though he had been physically struck. His face cycled through a series of emotions, raw fury, utter disbelief, and finally, a sputtering, incandescent rage. "Fired! You're fired!" he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "Dubois, get her out of my sight. Get this uneducated, insolent thing out of here now." Mr. Dubois rushed forward. "Ma'am, please," he whispered urgently to Elena. "Just apologize to the gentleman." Elena turned her head slightly to acknowledge her manager, a flicker of regret in her eyes for the position she was putting him in. "There is nothing to apologize for, Jacques," she said, using his first name with a familiarity that stunned him into silence. She then turned her attention back to Sterling. Her movements were calm, almost serene. She reached into the small pocket of her apron, the one where she kept her notepad and pen. But instead of her pad, she pulled out her wallet. With deliberate, unhurried motions, she opened it. The eyes of everyone at the table and several surrounding tables were glued to her hands. She bypassed the few cash bills and credit cards, her fingers finding a specific, well-worn plastic card tucked in a side flap. It was a university ID, old from her graduate school days, but immaculately preserved. She placed it gently on the table next to Sterling's half-eaten dessert. She didn't slam it down. She placed it with the quiet finality of a checkmate. The photo showed a younger Elena, her hair loose, her eyes bright with academic ambition. But it was the words printed on the card that commanded the room. Emblazoned across the top, in bold crimson letters, was the university crest and its name, Harvard University. And beneath her photo, her name and designation, Elena Petrova. PhD candidate, Department of Linguistics. A collective, soft gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Mark looked like he had seen a ghost. But Elena wasn't finished. "You are mistaken, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice now completely devoid of any service industry deference. It was crisp, academic, and utterly commanding. Her accent was still there, but it no longer sounded like a vulnerability. It sounded like authenticity. "I am not uneducated. I hold a doctorate in theoretical linguistics from Harvard University. My dissertation, Semantic Anchoring, a novel framework for resolving symbolic ambiguity in artificial neural networks, was awarded the Ellison Prize for outstanding research in my field." She paused, letting the words sink in. Sterling stared at the ID card as if it were a venomous snake. "The Petrovic-Larsen conjecture?" she continued, a faint, ironic smile touching her lips. "Dr. Ivan Petrovich is my father. I grew up discussing its limitations over breakfast. The proprietary algorithm that Innovate Lingua is using to solve the symbol grounding problem is a direct, practical application of the semantic anchoring framework I published 3 years ago. They are brilliant engineers, but their work stands on the shoulders of my theoretical research. They even cited my dissertation in their initial patent filing. Page 17, footnote 4. She looked at him, her eyes clear and sharp. I'm not eavesdropping on your business, Mr. Sterling. I am, in a very real sense, the uncredited intellectual architect of the technology you are about to so poorly represent. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so profound you could hear the distant hum of the city through the thick plate glass. Arthur Sterling's entire worldview, his comfortable and cruel hierarchy, had been shattered in less than a minute by a waitress and a plastic ID card. His face, once red with rage, had turned a pasty, sickly white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The man who had built an empire on words was speechless. Elena looked past him, at the wide-eyed Chloe and the ashen-faced Mark. For your information, Dr. Sharma will not be impressed by your contextual resonance points. What you should be discussing is how the algorithm uses a multi-layered Bayesian inference model to create probabilistic anchors to a curated ontological database. That is the secret sauce. And you should be prepared to defend it against a critique from the perspective of embodied cognition. Good luck with your meeting. With that final, devastatingly precise piece of advice, she turned, gave a small, apologetic nod to the shell-shocked Mr. Dubois, and walked away from the table, leaving her Harvard ID sitting on the white linen tablecloth like a tombstone marking the death of a billionaire's ego. Elena didn't walk to the staff locker room. She walked directly to the front entrance of Aurelia, her steps light and even. The hushed whispers followed her like a wave, a mixture of awe, shock, and dawning comprehension spreading through the dining room. She had not been fired. She had resigned, in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. As she passed the host stand, she gently placed her apron on the counter. The young hostess stared at her eyes like saucers. That was, she stammered. Necessary, Elena finished for her, giving her a small, genuine smile. And then she was gone, out the grand doors and into the cool night air, the muffled sounds of the shocked restaurant fading behind her. She didn't feel angry anymore. She felt a profound, exhilarating sense of release, as if she had just shed a heavy skin she hadn't even realized she was wearing. Back inside Aurelia, the atmosphere at Table 7 was apocalyptic. Arthur Sterling sat frozen, staring at the Harvard ID. He was, for the first time in his adult life, utterly and completely humiliated. He had been so sure of his world, so certain of his ability to judge and categorize people. That certainty now lay in ruins. He had mocked a waitress for her accent, only to discover she possessed an intellect in the very field he was trying to conquer that dwarfed his own. And he had done it publicly, in a room full of his peers. Chloe was the first to move. She slowly picked up her purse, her face pale. I think I should go, she murmured. There was no deference to Sterling in her voice now, only a desperate need to distance herself from the radioactive crater he had become. She didn't wait for a response. Mark remained, but he looked terrified, as if he expected the ground to swallow him whole. He kept glancing from Sterling's face to the ID card, his mind clearly racing, calculating the damage. The check arrived, brought by a trembling young busboy who had been sent by Mr. Dubois, who seemed incapable of approaching the table himself. The busboy placed the leather folder on the table and fled. The bill was astronomical, a fitting price for a last meal. Sterling finally moved. His hand, still shaking, reached for the ID card. He picked it up, turned it over, and then, with a choked sound of fury and shame, he threw it across the table. He stood up so violently that his chair screeched and toppled backward. Without a word to Mark, he stormed out of the restaurant, his face a thunderous mask. The story spread through New York's elite circles like wildfire. It was too delicious, too perfectly ironic to remain a secret. By the next morning, every venture capitalist, every investment banker, every tech CEO from Wall Street to Silicon Alley had heard a version of it. Arthur Sterling, the great titan, had been intellectually disemboweled by a waitress he had spent an entire evening tormenting. The story was told with glee in boardrooms and whispered over cocktails. Sterling became a punchline, a cautionary tale about arrogance. His meeting with Dr. Anya Sharma was a disaster. It's unclear whether she had already heard the story, or if Sterling's shattered confidence was simply that obvious. He fumbled his way through the presentation, a hollowed-out version of his usually domineering self. When he got to the technical part, he tried to use the terms Elena had provided, but they sounded alien and clumsy in his mouth. He couldn't elaborate. He couldn't defend them. Dr. Sharma, a woman with piercing intelligence, listened patiently. When he was finished, she simply removed her glasses, polished them, and said, "Mr. Sterling, your understanding of the core science behind this technology appears to be superficial. My fund invests in deep tech, which requires deep knowledge from its backers. I'm afraid we will not be moving forward." The rejection was polite, clinical, and absolutely devastating. Just as Elena had predicted, Dr. Sharma's withdrawal triggered a cascade. Other investors, already spooked by the rumors of Sterling's public humiliation, pulled out. The Innovate Lingua deal, which was meant to be his crowning achievement, collapsed within 48 hours. The failure cost his fund hundreds of millions in potential gains, and more importantly, it shattered his reputation as an infallible deal-maker. The man who judged everyone on their potential had just failed his own public exam in the most spectacular way possible. The weeks following the incident at Aurelia were a slow, agonizing unraveling for Arthur Sterling. The story of the Harvard waitress had grown into a legend in the city's financial circles. It was no longer just gossip, it was a parable. He became the living embodiment of the adage that arrogance precedes a fall. Colleagues he had once intimidated now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Junior partners in his own firm, like Mark, began quietly circulating their resumes, sensing the rot that had set in at the core of the company's leadership. Sterling's confidence, the very engine of his success, was shattered. He became paranoid and indecisive. He snapped at his staff over minor issues and second-guessed every decision. During one particularly tense board meeting for a different portfolio company, a young analyst, emboldened by the shifting power dynamics, challenged Sterling's strategy. When Sterling tried to shout him down, the analyst coolly retorted, "With all due respect, Arthur, perhaps we should consult a linguistics expert before proceeding." The snickers around the table were barely suppressed. The insult had become a weapon that could be used against him at any time. His authority was gone, replaced by a caricature. His professional life wasn't the only thing that suffered. The story reached the ears of the press. A tenacious journalist from a major business publication wrote a feature piece titled "The Waitress and the VC," framing the story as a modern-day fable about classism and hubris in the tech world. While Elena's name was kept private at her request, the journalist had tracked down a dozen witnesses from the restaurant. Sterling's was not. His photo was plastered next to the headline. The article went viral, and the public fallout was immense. His name became synonymous with entitled arrogance. Charities he supported began to quietly distance themselves, and invitations to exclusive social events dried up. He had built his world on a foundation of perceived power, and now, with that perception shattered, his world was crumbling. Meanwhile, Elena Petrova's life was transforming in ways she had never anticipated. The day after she walked out of Aurelia, she received an email with a subject line that made her heart skip a beat. An inquiry from Dr. Anya Sharma. Dr. Sharma, it turned out, was as resourceful as she was intelligent. Intrigued by the whispers she had heard even before her disastrous meeting with Sterling, she had done some digging. She had found Elena's published dissertation and had been profoundly impressed. The email was direct and to the point. Dear Dr. Petrova, I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Mr. Arthur Sterling. His loss, I suspect, might be my gain. I have read your work on semantic anchoring, and I find it to be the most compelling theoretical leap in your field in the last decade. I would be very interested in discussing your current research and any future projects you may be considering. My fund doesn't just invest in companies, we invest in brilliant minds. Please let me know if you would be available for a meeting at your earliest convenience. They met for coffee 2 days later. There was no pretense, no power play. It was a meeting of two sharp, academic minds. Dr. Sharma was brilliant, incisive, and deeply respectful of Elena's work. She listened intently as Elena spoke, not about her time at Aurelia, but about her passion for language, her theories on the future of human-AI communication, and the research she longed to pursue. By the end of their 2-hour conversation, Dr. Sharma made her an offer that left Elena breathless. It wasn't a job, it was a proposition. She offered to provide seed funding for Elena to establish her own research lab and consultancy firm. She would have complete academic freedom, state-of-the-art resources, and a direct line to Dr. Sharma's network of tech companies who were desperate for the kind of deep expertise she possessed. The world has enough arrogant men who think they understand technology, Dr. Sharma had said, her eyes twinkling. What it needs are more brilliant women to actually build it. 6 months later, the Petrova Linguistic Solutions Lab opened its doors in a sleek office space in the heart of the tech district. Elena hired a small, dedicated team of researchers and engineers. Her first client was Innovate Lingua. The original founders, freed from Sterling's influence, had reached out to her directly, offering her not just a consultancy fee, but a significant stake in the company and the title of Chief Strategy Officer. They wanted the architect of their core technology to help guide its future. Elena's life was no longer about surviving, it was about thriving. She traded her Waitress uniform for tailored blazers, the clatter of dishes for the quiet hum of servers processing complex data. Her accent, the one Sterling had so viciously mocked, became her trademark. In a world of homogeneous Silicon Valley talk, her voice, with its melodic Eastern European cadence, was a mark of distinction, a sign of a different perspective, of a mind that saw the world through a unique and valuable lens. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elena was walking through Central Park after a successful and exhilarating board meeting. She felt a sense of peace and rightness that had eluded her for years. By chance, she saw a familiar figure sitting alone on a park bench. It was Arthur Sterling. He looked smaller, diminished. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, and he stared blankly at the people passing by. The aura of power and menace was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. Their eyes met for a brief second. A flicker of recognition, of shame, of pure, unadulterated humiliation passed across his face. He quickly looked away, hunching his shoulders as if to disappear. Elena didn't smile or gloat. She felt a surprising, faint wave of something akin to pity. She had not sought to destroy him. She had only sought to defend her own dignity. His ruin was entirely of his own making. She simply kept walking, leaving him behind on his bench, a relic of a past she had transcended. He was a prisoner of his own prejudice, while she was free, her future as limitless as the New York skyline rising before her. 5 years is a lifetime in the world of technology. In that time, Petrova Linguistic Solutions, under Elena's leadership, had become more than just a successful consultancy. It was a cornerstone of the ethical AI movement. Elena had not only helped Innovate Lingua become the undisputed global leader in communication software, but she had also pioneered new frameworks for identifying and mitigating bias in machine learning algorithms. Her work was revolutionary, earning her accolades, awards, and a reputation as one of the most brilliant and forward-thinking minds in the industry. She was no longer just Dr. Petrova, the academic. She was Elena Petrova, the CEO, the innovator, a keynote speaker who could command the rapt attention of thousands. She sat on boards, advised governments, and her opinion pieces were published in the most respected journals. Her accent, once a target of mockery, was now an iconic part of her public persona, a sound associated with piercing insight and unwavering integrity. She had proven, on a global scale, that the content of one's mind was infinitely more powerful than the cadence of one's speech. One evening, she found herself back in New York, the city where her life had so dramatically pivoted. She was the guest of honor at a gala celebrating leaders in science and technology, held in a grand ballroom that wasn't so different from the restaurant she had once worked in. As she accepted her award, she spoke about her journey, not the specifics of that night at Aurelia, but of the broader principles she had learned. "We build machines that learn from us," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the vast hall. "They learn our patterns, our habits, our knowledge, but they also learn our biases, our blind spots, our prejudices. The greatest challenge of our time is not to build smarter machines, but to become wiser humans. To learn to look past the superficial markers of accent or dress or profession and see the boundless, often hidden potential that exists in every single person." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as she was leaving, a young woman who was working as an event staffer approached her nervously. "Dr. Petrova," she said, a distinct Irish accent coloring her words, "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it gives people like me hope." Elena smiled warmly, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Your voice is a part of your story," Elena told her. "Never let anyone make you feel it is a liability." As her car pulled away from the gala, it passed by a familiar building. Aurelia. The restaurant had closed 2 years prior, a victim of changing tastes, and some whispered, the lingering stain of a scandal that had become an urban legend. It was now a high-end, generic bank branch, a place where money was counted, but value was rarely understood. Curiosity piqued, she asked her driver to take a detour. They drove through the less glamorous streets of the city, ending up in a neighborhood of warehouses and old apartment blocks. It was the address of a low-cost logistics company, a place that handled last-mile deliveries for online retailers. And there, under the harsh fluorescent lights of a loading dock, she saw him, Arthur Sterling. He was not driving a car, he was directing them, a clipboard in his hand and a cheap, high-visibility vest over a faded, rumpled shirt. He looked old, tired, and utterly defeated. The fire was gone from his eyes, replaced by the dull, vacant look of someone just trying to get through the day. He was shouting instructions at a driver, but his voice, once a booming instrument of power, was now thin and reedy, lost in the noise of the city. He was no longer a millionaire, a venture capitalist, or a titan of industry. He was just a man on a loading dock, a footnote in a story that was now entirely her own. He had lost everything, not because a waitress had outsmarted him, but because he had built his life on a foundation of sand, on the flawed belief that his worth was measured by his ability to diminish others. Elena watched for only a moment. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, not even pity. There was only a quiet sense of closure. She had not needed to see this to know she had won. Her victory wasn't his failure. It was her success, her happiness, her impact on the world. "Let's go," she said softly to her driver. As the car pulled away, leaving the loading dock and the ghost of Arthur Sterling behind, Elena did not look back. Her gaze was fixed forward, on the sparkling skyline of the city she now called home, a city of infinite possibilities, a city that had finally learned to listen to what she had to say. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a rude millionaire and a brilliant waitress. It's a powerful reminder that we should never judge a person by their accent, their uniform, or their station in life. True intelligence, worth, and dignity are not things that can be bought or flaunted. They are qualities carried within. Elena Petrova didn't just win an argument in a restaurant. She reclaimed her narrative and proved that the most powerful voice isn't always the loudest, but the one that speaks the truth. Arthur Sterling lost his empire of arrogance, not to a waitress, but to a reality he refused to see. That genius and potential can be found anywhere, often in the very people we are conditioned to overlook. What did you think of Elena's incredible moment of revelation? Have you ever witnessed someone being so completely underestimated? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of karmic justice and hidden strength. Thank you for listening.